One night with me, and your debt is paid.
Your brother has 48 hours before they start removing his fingers. Minasio's stomach dropped. He didn't look like someone who'd ever thrown a punch. His hands were too clean, his posture too relaxed, but there was something about the way he held himself, the deliberate stillness, that made her think he'd never needed to. I don't have the money. Nobody has $300,000 just lying around. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. No. Kang Ji-hoon leaned forward, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, something almost human flickered in his eyes. But I have a different proposal. One that doesn't require money at all. The way he looked at her made Minasio's skin prickle, not with fear exactly, but with the sense that she'd walked into something far more complicated than a simple debt negotiation. What kind of proposal? One night. He said it like he was offering her tea. Spend one night with me here, and your brother's debt vanishes. Every record destroyed, every threat lifted. He walks away clean. $300,000 for 12 hours. The math was obscene. The offer was insane. And yet Minacio found herself asking the question she'd regret forever. Just one night. And if I refuse? The question escaped before she could stop it. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. Then the debt stands. Your brother made his choices, and he'll face the consequences. But you walked into my building tonight, Mississippi Park. You came to me. That tells me you're desperate enough to consider options you'd normally never touch. He was right, and that knowledge burned in her chest. Minacio had spent 3 days calling every number in her brother's phone, visited his apartment twice, filed a police report that went nowhere. The loan sharks who'd first come knocking had pointed her here, to the top of the food chain, to the man who actually held the debt after it had been sold and resold through Seoul's underground economy. How do I know you'll keep your word? She forced herself to meet his eyes. How do I know this isn't? Because I don't break my promises. Something flickered across his face, gone too quickly to identify. In my world, reputation is everything. If I say your brother's debt vanishes, it vanishes. Every record, every person who knows about it, will forget it existed. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights in the darkness. Somewhere down there, Tae-min was hiding, probably terrified, definitely drowning in regret. Her younger brother had always been impulsive, but gambling away this kind of money went beyond stupid, it was suicidal. Minacio thought of their childhood, of promising their dying mother she'd look after him. She thought of her tiny studio apartment, her unfinished paintings, the scholarship application she'd been working on before this nightmare began. Everything in her life was carefully controlled, meticulously planned to build toward a future where she wasn't struggling for every meal. This wasn't part of the plan. Just one night, she heard herself say. And he's free. Completely. Completely. Ji-hoon stood, buttoning his suit jacket. You have my word. 3 of Ji-hoon's men waited outside the office, silent, motionless, like statues carved from violence. They didn't look at her as she followed their boss down a private corridor she hadn't noticed before. The penthouse was larger than she'd realized, stretching beyond the office into living spaces that screamed wealth so extreme it became almost abstract. You can leave at any time, Ji-hoon said as they walked. I'm not interested in keeping prisoners. Then the debt would stand. I'm offering a transaction, Mississippi Park. One you're free to decline at any point. He glanced back at her. But once you leave, the offer expires. There won't be a second chance. They passed through a living room that could have housed her entire apartment 3 times over. Modern art hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from galleries she could never afford to enter. A grand piano sat in one corner, its black surface reflecting the ambient lighting like still water. Do you live here alone? The question surprised her as much as him. Does that matter? I suppose not. But it did somehow. This place felt like a museum, beautiful and cold and desperately empty. No photographs, no personal touches, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here rather than just existing in the space between business dealings. Ji-hoon stopped at a door, pushed it open. You can use this room to change, if you'd like. There are clothes in the closet, all new, various sizes. Or you can wear what you came in. Minacio peered inside. Another massive space, dominated by a bed that could sleep 4 people comfortably. The closet he'd mentioned was visible through an open door, Not a closet, really, but an entire room dedicated to clothing. Why do you have women's clothes? Her throat tightened. How many people have you made this offer to? You're the first. Something in his tone made her believe him. I had them delivered this afternoon, after I learned you'd be coming. How did you know I'd come? Because you love your brother. Ji-hoon leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, he looked almost human. Almost. Desperate love makes people do impossible things. I was counting on it. The honesty was somehow worse than deception would have been. He'd calculated this, manipulated the situation to bring her here, and he wasn't even pretending otherwise. Min Seo wanted to hate him for it, but the emotion wouldn't crystallize. Everything felt distant, like she was watching this happen to someone else. I'll be in the living room, he continued. Take your time. After he left, Min Seo stood frozen in the doorway for what might have been seconds or hours. Her mind refused to process what was happening, kept skittering away from the reality of the choice she'd made. Finally, she forced herself inside and closed the door. The room smelled faintly of jasmine. She noticed details without really seeing them. The silk sheets, the modern art on the walls, the view of Seoul that somehow seemed even more spectacular from this angle. In the closet, she found exactly what he described. Clothes in multiple sizes, all high-end labels she recognized from window shopping during better times. Her hands shook as she touched a black dress, soft as water. Part of her wanted to refuse his offer of new clothes, to keep her paint-stained jeans and oversized sweater as armor against whatever was about to happen. But another part, the part that had gotten her through years of poverty and loss, whispered that she should take every small comfort available. 20 minutes later, she emerged wearing the black dress and her own sneakers, unable to force herself into the designer heels that matched. Ji-hoon was exactly where he'd said he'd be, standing by the windows with a glass of something amber in his hand. You didn't change shoes, he observed. I didn't agree to a makeover. Just one night. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Would you like a drink? No. Smart. Always keep your wits around dangerous men. He turned to face her fully. Are you hungry? The question was so mundane, so completely divorced from the situation, that Min Seo almost laughed. I don't think I could eat. When did you last have a meal? I don't. Yesterday? The day before. She'd lost track somewhere between the loan shark's visit and the sleepless nights trying to find her brother. Ji-hoon set down his glass. Come. The kitchen was enormous, professional grade, and clearly unused. Everything gleamed with the pristine quality of appliances that existed for show rather than function. Ji-hoon moved through it with surprising confidence, though, pulling ingredients from a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the silence. You cook. Min Seo couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Don't sound so surprised. Even criminals need to eat. He set a pan on the stove. Sit. She sat at the kitchen island, feeling absurd in her borrowed dress and paint-stained sneakers, watching a mafia boss crack eggs into a bowl. The surrealism of the moment threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before she could stop it. Making eggs. All of it. The offer, the clothes, this, she gestured at the kitchen. Men like you don't do things without reason. Men like me. Ji-hoon's back was to her, his attention apparently on the eggs sizzling in the pan. What do you think men like me are, Mississippi Park? Dangerous. Cruel. Practical. She watched his shoulders tense slightly. You don't erase debts out of kindness, and you certainly don't cook for strangers out of concern for their well-being. You're right. He plated the eggs with practiced ease, added toast from somewhere, set it in front of her. I am all of those things. But you're still going to eat, because you're hungry, and because refusing would be childish. The smell hit her then, butter and pepper and something else she couldn't identify. Her stomach cramped with hunger she'd been ignoring for days. Min Seo picked up the fork with shaking hands and took a bite. It was perfect. She ate in silence while Ji-hoon watched, his expression unreadable. When she'd cleaned the plate, he took it without comment and poured her a glass of water. Better. Yes. She hated that she had to admit it. Good. Now we can talk. About what? We made a deal. I'm here. What else is there to discuss? Ji-hoon leaned against the counter, studying her with that same unsettling intensity from the office. 4 years ago, you were walking home from campus. Late November, around 9 at night. Do you remember? The question caught her off guard. I don't. What does that have to do with anything? Just answer. Min-seo tried to remember. 4 years ago, she'd been a first-year student, barely keeping her head above water financially and academically. Late November would have been exam season. She'd walked home at night constantly back then, too broke for taxis, too tired to care about safety. I walked home every night. I don't remember anything specific about that date. Hongdae area, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. You saw 3 men attacking someone in an alley. Most people would have called the police, maybe, or more likely just kept walking. You did neither. A memory surfaced, hazy with time and trauma. She'd been cutting through side streets to save time, exhausted from studying, when she'd heard sounds of violence. And yes, she'd seen 3 men kicking someone on the ground, their victim curled in a defensive ball. I threw a bottle, she said slowly. Glass bottle from a recycling bin. Hit one of them in the back. You screamed, Ji-hoon corrected. Screamed that you'd called the police, that they were coming. Then you threw the bottle. Then you ran like hell, and those 3 men chased you instead of finishing what they'd started. The memory crystallized fully now. She'd sprinted through those streets, heart hammering, certain she was about to die for intervening in something that wasn't her business. But she'd been faster, had known the area better, and had lost them after 10 minutes of pure terror. You saved my life that night. Min-seo stared at him. That was you. I was younger. Stupider. Thought I could meet with a rival group alone, prove something to my father. His jaw tightened. They had different plans. If you hadn't interrupted when you did, I wouldn't have survived long enough for my people to find me. You've been watching me since then? The thought made her skin crawl. For 4 years. Not watching. Aware of. Ji-hoon met her eyes steadily. I make it my business to know about people who've impacted my life. You went back to your studies, struggled through university, graduated despite working 3 jobs. Your brother got into gambling when your mother died 2 years ago. I knew when the debt was sold to my organization. I knew he'd run. And I knew you'd come looking for a way to save him. Because you arranged it. Understanding crashed over her like cold water. You bought his debt specifically to get to me. Yes. The single word hung between them, simple and terrible. Min-seo's hands clenched into fists on the counter. Why? If you wanted to repay some imagined debt for that night, you could have just erased what Taemin owed. Why this? Because I'm selfish. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change. I've thought about you for 4 years, Mississippi Park. Wondered what kind of person runs toward danger for a stranger. Wondered if that reckless courage extended to other areas of your life, or if it was a single moment of impulse. I wanted to know you, and people like me don't get to know people like you through normal means. So you engineered a situation where I'd have no choice. You always had a choice. You could have walked away, let your brother face the consequences of his actions. But I knew you wouldn't, because that's who you are. He pushed away from the counter. I'm not claiming moral high ground here. I'm telling you the truth because you asked, and because I promised myself that if I ever got you here, I wouldn't lie to you. Min-seo felt like she couldn't breathe. The kitchen's pristine surfaces seemed to close in around her, the ambient lighting suddenly too bright. This is insane. Probably. You're obsessed with a stranger who threw a bottle 4 years ago. Yes. And you think one night is going to, what? Satisfy that obsession? Make us even. Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. I think one night will either cure me or destroy me. Either way, I need to know. Min-seo should have felt trapped. The logical part of her brain screamed that she was alone with a dangerous man who'd manipulated her into this situation. But standing in that sterile kitchen, watching Ji-hoon's carefully constructed facade crack just enough to reveal something raw underneath, she felt something else entirely. Curiosity. Show me the rest of this place. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Ji-hoon's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? That I'd run? Cry. Min-seo stood, smoothing down the borrowed dress. You've spent 4 years building up some fantasy version of me in your head. Maybe it's time you met the real person. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or approval. He gestured toward the doorway. This way. They left the kitchen, moving through spaces that felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Each room was immaculate, expensively furnished, and completely devoid of personality. Minesio noticed the absence of life in every corner. No books left open, no coffee cups, no jackets thrown over chairs. Even the art on the walls felt chosen by an interior designer rather than someone who actually cared about it. You don't really live here, do you? She said as they entered what appeared to be a study. This is just where you exist between obligations. Ji-hoon stopped. Perceptive. I'm an artist. I notice when spaces feel dead. She ran her fingers along a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes that had clearly never been opened. Where do you actually live? Or do you have multiple places like this scattered around the city? 3 properties in Seoul, 1 in Busan, 1 in Tokyo. He watched her examine the books. All of them look like this. All of them feel like this. That sounds exhausting. It's necessary. People in my position can't afford to be, he paused, searching for the word. Human. Minesio pulled out a book at random, some classic Korean literature, first edition, probably worth more than her entire year's rent. Can't afford to have homes that feel lived in, can't afford to cook your own meals except when making a point to a captive audience, can't afford to want things just because you want them. You're angry. I'm something. She shoved the book back onto the shelf. I haven't decided what yet. Ji-hoon moved to the window, hands in his pockets. Beyond the glass, Seoul pulsed with light and life, millions of people living their messy, complicated, beautifully human lives. My father built this organization from nothing. Clawed his way up from the streets until he controlled half the underground economy in this city. He taught me that weakness is death, that emotions are liabilities, that the moment you let someone see the real you is the moment they find your throat. Sounds like a terrible way to live. It kept him alive for 60 years in a world that kills most people before 40. His reflection in the glass looked tired. It's kept me alive for 32 years so far. Minesio joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. Is that what you want? To just survive until something finally kills you? Want doesn't factor into it. That's a coward's answer. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Ji-hoon turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw genuine anger flash in his eyes. Careful, Mississippi Park. You're under my protection for one night, but that doesn't make you immune to consequences. Then throw me out. End the deal. Let my brother's debt stand. She met his glare without flinching. But don't pretend you're some slave to circumstances when you literally engineered this entire situation because you wanted something. You want. You're just too scared to admit it might make you vulnerable. The silence stretched between them, dangerous and electric. Minesio's heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to look away. She'd spent too many years bowing to people with power, accepting her place in the hierarchy of money and influence. If she was going to spend one night in this gilded prison, she wouldn't spend it pretending this man was anything other than what he was, human, flawed, and desperately lonely. Finally, Ji-hoon laughed. The sound was sharp, almost painful. You're either incredibly brave or suicidally stupid. My brother gambled away $300,000. Stupidity might run in the family. But she smiled slightly, tension draining from her shoulders. Are you going to actually talk to me, or are we going to spend the whole night with you pretending to be made of stone? What do you want to talk about? I don't know. Normal things. Minesio moved away from the window, examining the study more carefully. What do you do when you're not terrifying people and buying their siblings' debts? Work, mostly. Meetings, negotiations, putting out fires before they spread. He followed her with his eyes. Occasionally killing people who've made catastrophically poor decisions. She froze. You're joking. I wish I was. Jesus. Minesio pressed her hand to her forehead. I can't process that. Then don't. You asked what I do, and I told you. Ji-hoon's expression had gone carefully neutral again. I'm not going to lie to you about who I am, Minesio. I've done terrible things. Unforgivable things. The fact that you threw a bottle to save my life doesn't change my nature. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it struck her oddly, made everything feel suddenly more real. She sat down in one of the study's leather chairs, needing something solid beneath her. Tell me about the worst thing you've ever done. Why? Ji-hoon remained standing, silhouetted against the window. Because if I'm going to be here, I need to know what I'm dealing with. The real you, not the carefully constructed image. She looked up at him. And because I think you've been carrying it alone for too long. Ji-hoon was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was reciting someone else's story. 2 years ago, one of my father's oldest associates decided to retire. Young Min-ho, he'd been with the organization since before I was born. Loyal, competent, never caused problems. He moved to the desk, traced his fingers along its edge. He wanted out, wanted to take his daughter and move to the countryside, open a restaurant or some peaceful fantasy like that. My father agreed. We don't usually let people leave, but Min-ho had earned it. Min-seo listened, afraid to interrupt. What my father didn't know was that Min-ho had been skimming money for years. Small amounts, carefully hidden, building up a nest egg for his retirement. About 50 million won in total. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. I discovered it during a routine audit. Brought the evidence to my father, expected him to handle it internally, maybe take the money back and still let Min-ho go with a warning. But that's not what happened. My father was deteriorating. Dementia, we found out later, though we didn't know it then. All he saw was betrayal from someone he trusted. Ji-hoon's hands clenched into fists. He ordered me to make an example. Wanted everyone in the organization to understand that loyalty meant everything, that even decades of service couldn't excuse theft. The air in the study felt thick, oppressive. Min-seo's throat tightened. I killed Young Min-ho in front of his daughter. Made her watch while his voice cracked slightly. She was 17. Just graduated high school. Had scholarships waiting, whole life ahead of her. I didn't touch her, but I might as well have murdered her too. Last I heard, she dropped out of university, moved across the country, won't speak to anyone from her old life. Ji-hoon. Don't. He held up a hand. Don't try to comfort me or tell me I didn't have a choice. I pulled the trigger. I looked a good man in the eyes and ended his life for stealing money I spend on shoes. Because my father commanded it, and because I was too much of a coward to refuse. Min-seo stood, moved toward him without thinking. Your father had dementia. He wasn't thinking clearly. Does that matter to Min-ho's daughter? Does that change the fact that I'm the monster who destroyed her life? Ji-hoon finally looked at her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. This is who I am, Min-seo. I've tried to be better since my father died, tried to run things with more mercy, but that blood doesn't wash off. Nothing I do will ever balance the scales. Is that why you wanted me here? Understanding crystallized. Because I saved your life once, and you thought maybe being near someone who'd done something purely good might somehow absolve you? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just selfish enough to want one night with someone who doesn't know to fear me. His laugh was bitter. Though I suppose that's ruined now. Min-seo reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and placed her hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. I'm not going to tell you what you did was acceptable. It wasn't. That girl deserved better, and Min-ho deserved better. I know. But you're not the same person now as you were then. I can see that. She squeezed his arm gently. You're carrying the weight of it, which means you understand what you took. That's not nothing. It's not enough. No, she agreed quietly. It probably never will be. But it's something. They stood like that for a long moment, her hand on his arm, the city lights casting strange shadows across the room. Finally, Ji-hoon moved away, breaking the contact. He walked to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her student loans. I need a drink. You should probably have one too. They ended up on the penthouse's balcony, despite the autumn chill. Seoul stretched beneath them like a circuit board, all glowing lines and pulsing nodes of activity. Min-seo wrapped a blanket Ji-hoon had provided around her shoulders and sipped wine that tasted like dark cherries and something she couldn't identify. Tell me about your art, Ji-hoon said, leaning against the railing. The subject change was jarring. Why? Because I've been talking about death and you've been listening without running. Seems fair you get to talk about something you care about. He glanced at her. And because I've been curious for 4 years. Min-seo considered refusing, maintaining some distance between them. But something about the confession in the study had shifted the dynamic. They were both just people now, stripped of pretenses, sitting with their respective damages. I paint memories, she said finally. Not literal representations, but the emotional truth of them. The way a moment feels rather than how it looked. Can you give me an example? She thought about her most recent piece, currently unfinished in her studio apartment. There's one I've been working on about my mother's funeral. But it's not the funeral itself, it's the moment afterward, standing in our old apartment, seeing all her things still in place like she might walk through the door any second. The painting is mostly empty space, negative area, with these small islands of detail where her presence used to be. That sounds devastating. It is. I cry every time I work on it. Min-seo took another sip of wine. But it's also necessary. I need to capture that feeling before it fades, before time makes the memory bearable. The raw truth of grief is important. Ji-hoon was quiet, and when she looked over, something in his expression had softened. I wish I could create something. Leave behind more than destruction. You could learn. Art isn't some mystical talent, it's practice and observation and willingness to fail repeatedly. She set down her wine glass. What would you paint, if you could? Honestly. Always. He smiled slightly. This moment. Right now. The way you look wrapped in that blanket, drinking wine that costs more than you make in a month, talking about grief and art with someone who kills people for a living. The absurdity of it. The unexpected piece. Min-seo's breath caught. That's actually beautiful. Don't sound so surprised. I can't help it. You keep not being what I expect. She pulled the blanket tighter. When I walked into your office tonight, I thought I knew exactly who you were. Calculated, cruel, playing with people like chess pieces. And you are those things, but you're also. Also what? Lonely. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Desperately, profoundly lonely. Ji-hoon didn't deny it. Instead, he looked out at the city, his profile sharp against the lights. When you exist the way I do, loneliness becomes background noise. You stop noticing it after a while. I don't believe that. I think you notice it every second of every day. Min-seo stood, moved to stand beside him at the railing. I think that's why you engineered this whole elaborate situation. Not really because you wanted me specifically, but because you needed someone, anyone, to see you as something other than a weapon or a monster. Psychology degree hidden in your art school education? Poverty degree. When you grow up struggling, you learn to read people fast. It's survival. She bumped her shoulder against his gently. I see you, Ji-hoon. The real you beneath all the armor. And I'm not running. He turned to face her fully. You should. Nothing good comes from getting close to me. Probably not. Min-seo reached up, surprising herself, and touched his face. His skin was warm despite the cold air. But I have until sunrise, and I think we're both tired of being alone. Min-seo. Don't. She moved closer. Don't think about the consequences or the danger or your carefully constructed rules about emotional distance. Just be here. Be human with me for a few hours. Ji-hoon's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek. His eyes closed briefly. You have no idea what you're asking. Then tell me. I'm asking you to see me at my worst and still choose to stay. I'm asking you to ignore every self-preservation instinct you have. I'm asking, his voice roughened. I'm asking you to break my heart at sunrise when you walk away, because that's what you'll do. That's what you should do. Maybe. Min-seo's thumb traced along his cheekbone. Or maybe we'll both walk away changed. Maybe this one night will be enough to remember we're both human underneath everything life has made us. You don't know what you're doing to me. Good. You've spent 4 years in control of this situation. Time for things to be a little uncertain. They moved back inside as the temperature dropped, settling in the living room with its impossible piano and expensive art. Ji-hoon shed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and for the first time looked like an actual person rather than a magazine spread. Min Seo curled into the corner of his massive couch, still wrapped in the blanket. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something you've never told anyone." Ji-hoon sat in a chair across from her, maintaining distance. "I hate this life. Every single aspect of it. The violence, the constant calculation, the way people look at me like I might explode at any moment." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I'm good at it, and walking away would mean someone worse takes over. So I stay, and I try to minimize the damage, and I tell myself that's enough." "Is it?" "No. But it's all I have." Min Seo absorbed this. "My turn. I resent my brother more than I love him sometimes. I know that's terrible, and I hate myself for feeling it, but watching him destroy his life over and over while I fight for every small success, it makes me furious. Coming here tonight, agreeing to this, part of me did it because I love him. But another part did it because I'm tired, and this seemed easier than continuing to save someone who won't save himself. That doesn't make you a bad person. Doesn't make me a good one either." She picked at the blanket's edge. "We're both just doing what we can with impossible situations. Maybe that's all anyone does." They talked through the night like that, trading truths, confessions, the small details that make a person real. Ji-hoon told her about his mother, who died when he was 7, leaving him alone with a father who saw him as a tool to sharpen rather than a child to raise. Min Seo told him about failing her first year of university, nearly dropping out before a professor saw something in her work and fought to keep her enrolled. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, exhaustion and wine caught up with them. Min Seo's eyes grew heavy, her